Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridhari
Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridhari
Jai Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridhari
Jai Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridhari
Yasoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana
Yasoda Nandana Braja
Yasoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari Jai Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridhari Yasoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Prabhupada. Reading from Srimad Bhagawatam, 3rd Canto, Chapter 15, doing text 29 and 30. Descriptions of the Kingdom of God. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Vari Etyo Nidivishtu Mitsator Apritsva Vayeteyor Nivishur Misatur Apritsva Purva Yata Purata Vraja Kapatika Yai Purva Yata Puruta Vraja Kapatika Ya Sarvatra Te Vishamaya Munaya Svadristya Sarvatra Te Vishamaya Munaya Savedristya Ye Sancharanti Avihata Vagata Vishankaha Ye Sanchanta Yaiva Hatta Vigata Vi Ye Sanchatra Yaiva Hatta Vigata Bhikshaka Vayoritor Nivishor Misasatur Aristva Purva Yata Puruta Vrajakapatikaya Savatrate Vishamaya Munaya Svadristya Ye Sanchanta Yaiva Hata Vigata Vishanka Varyo Itor Nivishur Misator Apritsva Purva Yata Purata Vrajakapatikaya Sarvatra Te Vashamaya Munaya Svadristya Ye Sajataran Yataivata Vigata Vishanka Others?
Varyeta Yorni Vishura Prishva Purvayata Purata Vajra Kapati Kaya Sarvatra Te Vishamaya Munaya Swadrishya Ye Sancharantya Vihata Vigata Vishanka Okay. Oh, jeez.
Teyor Nivishur Misator Akrishya
Varyeta Yorni Vivishur Vishatora Prishva
Gurvaita Purata Vajraka Pitakya
Purvayata Purata Vajra Kapati Kaya
Sarvatra Te Vishamaya Munaya Swadrishya
Sarvatra Te Vishamaya Munaya Swadrishya
Ye Shancharantiya Vita Vigata Vishanka
Ye Sancharantya Vihata Vigata Vishanka Varyeta Yorni Vivishur Vishatora Prishva Purvayata Purata Vajra Kapati Kaya Sarvatra Te Vishamaya Munaya Swadrishya Ye Sancharantya Vihata Vigata Vishanka.
Okay, word for word. Dvari, in the door. Eteyo, both doorkeepers. Nivi Vishuhu, entered. Mishato, while seeing. Abritsva, without asking. Purvaha, as before. Yata, as. Purata, made of gold. Vajra, and diamond. Kapatika, the doors. Ya, which. Savatra, everywhere. Te, they. Vishvamaya, without any sense of discrimination. Munaya, the great sages. Svadristya, of their own will. Yea, who. Sancharanti, move. Avihata, without being checked. Vigata, without. Abhishankaha, doubt. Translation. The great sages, headed by Sanaka, had opened doors everywhere. They had no idea of ours and theirs. With open minds, they entered the seventh door of their own will, just as they had passed through the 6 other doors, which were made of gold and diamonds. Please repeat. The great sages, headed by Sanaka, had open doors everywhere. They had no idea of ours and theirs. With open minds, they entered the seventh door of their own will. Just as they had passed through the 6 other doors, which were made of gold and diamonds. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The great sages, namely Sanaka, Sanatan, Sanandan, and Sanat Kumar, although very old in years, maintained themselves eternally as small children. They were not at all duplicitous, and they entered the doors exactly as little children enter places without any idea what is to trespass. That is a child's nature. A child can enter any place and no one checks him. Indeed, a child is generally welcome in his attempts to go places, but if it so happens that a child is checked from entering a door, he naturally becomes very sorry and angry. That is the nature of a child. In this case, the same thing happened. The childlike saintly personalities entered all 6 doors of the palace, and no one checked them. Therefore, when they attempted to enter the 7th door and were forbidden by the doormen, who checked them with their sticks, they naturally became very angry and sorrowful. An ordinary child would cry, but because these were not ordinary children, they immediately made preparations to punish the doormen, for the doormen had committed a great offense. Even to this day, a saintly person is never checked from entering anyone's door in India. Text 30. Tan viksha bhaktaran samachatur kamaran vidran distrada vishayo vidadatma tattvam vitre chakshalamayatmatad paranamstau tejo vihasya bhagavat pritik shakula shilao. Translation. The 4 boy sages who had nothing to cover their bodies but the atmosphere looked only 5 years old. Even though they were the oldest of all living creatures and had realized the truth of the self, but when the porters who happened to possess a disposition quite unpalatable to the Lord saw the sages, they blocked their way with their staffs. Despising their glories, although the sages did not deserve such treatment at their hands. Purport. The four sages were the firstborn sons of Brahma. Therefore, all other living entities, including Lord Shiva, are born later and are therefore younger than the 4 Kumaras. Although they looked like 5-year-old boys and traveled naked, the Kumaras were older than all the other creatures and had realized the truth of the self. Such saints were not to be forbidden to enter the kingdom of Vaikuntha. But by chance, the doorman objected to the entrance. This was not fitting. The Lord is always anxious to serve sages like the Kumaras. But in spite of knowing this fact, the doorman astonishingly and outrageously prohibited them from entering. Om Gyan Timirandishya Gnanjana Shlakaya Chaksun Militam Yitasma Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya No Vistam Shapitam Inabudle Swamipakara Mayam Darantisva Barankam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Parakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavam Shri Rupam Shakitatam Sarvagnatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Savadvetam Savadutam Vijansitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Parasara Sagamulita Shri Vishakam Tamstra Hey Krishna Kurna Sinu Dina Bandha Jagapate Gopisha Gopikanta Radha Namustate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Ravna Mishri Vishvansuti Harbinami Hari Pre Vancha Kalpatri Vischa Kripasindu Bivacha Vitanam Pavnibil Vaishnav Namanamaha. The great sages, headed by Sanaka, had opened doors everywhere. They had no idea of ours and theirs. With open minds, they entered the 7th door of their own will, just as they had passed through the 6 other doors, which were made of gold and diamonds. Just like to thank everyone for coming to Srimad Bhagawatam class and listening to Srimad Bhagawatam, by hearing the instructions and the purports of the pure devotee we make gradual spiritual advancement. So, herein we see that the 4 Kumaras are these great personalities, and that the gatekeepers had offended these great saints. And in one sense, it's described that the 4 Kumaras, in the very beginning, they were considered an impersonalists. But after gradually understanding the Vedas and understanding Krishna's position, they became these great devotees. So, oftentimes we find this within following Vedic instructions, that sometimes people follow the rules or regulations without not understanding why they're following them, right? This is very important, that if we're following particular rules or regulations of the Vedas, it's essential we know how to apply it and how to use this. The gatekeepers were well intended. They actually meant well. They were just doing their duty. But because maybe out of sentiment, they didn't quite understand their duty in relation to great saintly personalities. As it said here that great saintly personalities acknowledge and follow the rules and regulations, but they're not necessarily bound by it. For example, even Srila Prabhupada makes a statement that, I think he said it to some of his disciples, that there was never a time that I did not follow these rules and regulations since birth. And so we understand great personalities also like Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj. They follow these rules and regulations. But these personalities are liberated personalities. They are pure devotees. But they often will follow the rules and regulations to for the masses, conditioned souls to follow. So, naturally, the pure devotee has no desire outside but to please Krishna. So, even this is also, in one sense, a kind of obviously it's instructive for us. It's not that these, in one sense, the gatekeepers, we see that they made a mistake by offending these great sages, but also it's very instructive for us. So when we're reading Vedic literatures and trying to understand the Vedas and following this in our daily lives to make spiritual advancement, we have to understand why we're following it. Now we can find sometimes in India, where this is the Vedas and Krishna consciousness is very familiar with most people that are living in India. But a lot of them don't necessarily have contact with Srila Prabhupada's books. And so they have kind of a scattered idea of the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. And oftentimes, even though they're very fortunate to be born in a very kind of very pious backgrounds, and there tend to be many people coming from Vedic cultures tend to be very in the mode of goodness, sometimes they don't necessarily always understand what they're following. Right? Oftentimes, I remember being in Gainesville or Tallahassee at the universities there, so I'd meet many Indian students. Some of them even freshmen, but usually like people getting their doctorates or masters. But many of them undergraduates, and I'd have different conversations with many of them. And sometimes I would meet people that Indians that come from India that once they come to America, they may even eat meat. And I always ask that question, like, they say that they're coming from a Brahmin background and they're raised in so many ways. And they, in one sense, intellectually know aspects of the Vedas. But yet, in some circumstances, when they come to America, they become highly influenced by Western culture. And I would always ask them, like, oh, you come from a Brahmin background, you were raised vegetarian, what would make you want to eat meat coming to America? And they would come up with some excuse like, well, that's what everyone does here, there's nothing else to eat, and therefore we just start eating meat. And so this is kind of an example of someone that they were following rules and regulations, not really knowing why. I mean, it's important to follow rules, but it's also that you have to understand why you're following. What's the significance behind that? What's the reason or meaning? Otherwise, it just becomes blind following. So oftentimes you'll meet different people kind of raised in maybe indirect kind of Vedic culture in some ways in India, and they have much piety to them, but oftentimes they follow things without understanding why they follow them. And this is very significant. We have to understand why we follow these rules and regulations. Otherwise, you just become blind followers. And so it's important when we're reading the Vedas and we're reading Bhagavad Gita and great literatures is to understand why we follow these. And so that's why it's also good is when devotees read together. And when devotees read together, they can go through certain things, where it may be Krishna book or Bhagavad Gita, and they can talk about certain points and try to understand them and actually then apply them into one's life. So this is a very important point, is that the doorkeepers meant well, but in one sense they didn't know how to discriminate between great personalities like the four Kumaras. So they made this great offense. And so this is very important to understand and realize, is that personalities that have dedicated themselves to pleasing Krishna or spreading Krishna's glories are not are not ordinary personalities. So that's why we give respect to all living entities, right? The spiritual practitioner sees all living entities as spiritual within them. We give respect to everyone, even the so-called non-devotees. But in particular, we give extra respect to people that really sacrifice themselves for the spreading the glories of Lord Chaitanya's mission, or Srila Prabhupada's mission. That's why we understand that the highest ashram, the sannyas ashram, is the ashram that where one is totally dedicating one's mind, body, and spirit to the propagation of Krishna consciousness and to fully understand Krishna consciousness. And we understand this is not such a easy ashram to take to. Therefore, even in it's said in Kali Yuga that's not recommended to take sannyas. It's a very challenging ashram to take. But when one actually does take to that ashram, one can fully engage one's mind in Krishna consciousness and spreading the glories of the Lord all over. But we understand this is a very difficult, painstaking position to take. It's not a light position to take. And even in the early days, Srila Prabhupada was trying to establish Van Ashram, and he had to make the choice of giving sannyas to men that weren't generally at a particular age of taking sannyas. Generally, the age of sannyas that one may take, if one can take it, is generally the age around 50 or later on. I think even within Iskcon now, if one wants to take sannyas, I think there's exceptions, but maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you have to be at least 50 to take sannyas. But I know, no, it's not the case. It's not the case anymore?
Balaram's scheduled to take sannyas when he's 40.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You have to have a driver's
But
license.
he's only 33, so it gives him 7 years to think about it, and
Yeah.
and also be observed.
Yeah. So the idea is that even when one takes sannyas, one takes that at a young age, you still have time to monitor that person, and also they have to kind of think within art, is this something that they're wanting to do? Yeah, because I know there was Ananda, what's his name? Ananda Tirtha Maharaj, but he took sannyas at like 45 or something like that, something very young, even younger than that, I think. But it's amazing that someone would want to take sannyas at that particular age, because one is dedicating one's mind self to the propagation of Krishna consciousness, and he's sacrificing himself for a higher level. Again, when Srila Prabhupada needed to establish the sannyas ashram, he gave sannyas to people that were at an incredibly young age, in their early 20s, even late 30s. and people took sannyas, and over time, due to their sincerity, they meant well, wanting to spread Krishna consciousness, but later on came to the understanding that maybe they weren't quite ready for that. But there were many great individuals that took sannyas in their early 20s, not maybe fully knowing what they're getting themselves into, but still ever remain sannyas this age and have done wonderful amounts of devotional service. So we should understand that when great personalities come, that all respect should be given, and one should try to serve those individuals too. And by serving those individuals, we can actually, this is actually very pleasing to Krishna, that the devotee doesn't go straight to Krishna, but he goes through the servant of Krishna. So we understand that in even the servant of Krishna, any of his disciples, he's just engaging in service to his spiritual master. So similarly, Srila Prabhupada, when he initiated so many people in spreading Krishna consciousness, he was doing this on the behalf of his spiritual master. And similarly, many of Srila Prabhupada's disciples are taking disciples, and they're doing this on the part of Srila Prabhupada to spread this Krishna consciousness movement. And we understand that persons in the sannyas ashram have dedicated all their being to the spreading of Krishna consciousness. This should be appreciated, and this one should be respected. And so we always have to be careful when we're around great personalities that we don't make offenses towards them. This is very instructive here, that it teaches that the four Kumars were great personalities, and the doorkeepers were stopping them from seeing Lord Vishnu, but they did this out of a lack of not understanding their position, and also to develop this pastime. And then I guess we were actually thinking about it, and I think it was something like they had the choice of taking 3 births back into the material world as devotees, or no, was it 5 births?
As demons, or 7 as devotees.
Yes, 7 as devotees, or 2 as demons, or 3 as demons. And then I was kind of thinking about myself, like, if I was in that position, what would I want to do? Would I want to be a demon and fight Krishna? Or would I just want to be like a devotee and take those births? And I was thinking, well, maybe I probably want to be a devotee. But at the same time, I was trying to understand why they want to take births as demons, but they just want to kind of get it done with and continue on. So that's kind of an interesting position to put someone in. Do you want to fight against Krishna, or do you want to be his devotee? So very interesting position they put in, and it's very interesting the choices that they made was to ultimately kind of get this done with, so we can go back to our service and serving Krishna in the spiritual world. So we should understand that the importance in Krishna consciousness is to respect great personalities that are serving Krishna in so many ways, and that our own devotional service, we have to kind of put our minds of where we're at. I mean, obviously, if you have to listen to a class like me, you might want to fall asleep. But if we're always trying to think of any aspect in Krishna consciousness, even if it's given by class that might put you to sleep, like myself, that we can always benefit from anything that's being said. That we have to fully have our minds engaged in this particular in Krishna consciousness, because we can understand, and this material world is just basically a place of suffering. There's suffering at every moment. So our minds may be in so many different directions. We may be thinking about the past, or we may be thinking about the future. But don't worry, it's the same thing whether it's the past or the future, birth, death, old age, disease. There's always going to be difficulties in this material world, and there's basically just different varieties of suffering. As much as we may hope in this material world, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's an economic failure, whether it's all different types of riots, food shortages, whatever it may be. If it's not a pandemic, it will be something else in the future. There's no loss of difficulties or sufferings in this world. But for the devotee, he's very practical and he understands the position of this world. This is a place of world that is a place of suffering and that no one can truly enjoy. We can only sometimes think we can enjoy this material world by the arrangements of the mind. And as we know that the mind can be one's best friend or worst enemy, and it can put one into so many difficulties when the mind is not fixed on Krishna, so to speak. But we can see that these miseries in the material world can actually give us an incentive to get serious and go back to Godhead. If we actually understand there's no hope whatsoever for enjoyment in this material world, once we come to that realization and understanding that I cannot enjoy this material world, and that my only solace is to engage in Krishna service. This is actually the only hope. That the devotee is not unnecessarily negative or morbid, that say a non-devotee may cease at one time. I think I was watching this video. It was an old video of 1979, and it was a debate between Ted Patrick and Rita Andamarsh and who else was there? Bhagawatam. Was it Bhagawatam? Yeah. And they had this debate between Ted Patrick. For a lot of those that are not familiar with Ted Patrick, he's a famous deprogrammer. And he would, they were on this debate, and Rita and Marge were saying that, we just want to talk about Bhagavad Gita, and Ted Patrick was, devotees kind of have fun with it because he had a very kind of interesting way how he would pronounce things. And through the whole debate, he wasn't really focusing on at the issue. He was just kind of name calling. And so he's saying, these people are no better than Mussolini, Hitler, Jim Jones. He would use all these interesting ways of presenting it. And Rita and Ramesh kind of just basically brought it back and said, look, we should come here and talk about Bhagavad Gita. We're not going to go into Ted Patrick's ideas of how he may kidnap people and do all this. We won't talk about any of those, how many times he's been to jail. And it was interesting. He was saying he didn't want to talk about it. He basically talked about it by saying that.
That's a good one.
So, yeah, we have to understand. And I think there's another lady. She was a parent of that was working with Ted Patrick. But she was saying, in their philosophy, all they talk about is how bad the material world is and how bad material things are and things are no good. And where's the joy? Where's the happiness in life? And how do you really enjoy life in this particular way? And so they went on to say that, no, that's not true. We talk about ultimate happiness and success, but it's more on an internal level. That's, if anyone thinks in this material world that they can actually enjoy, find the real happiness in the material world, they're number one fool. And that we should understand that all we have to do is basically turn the news on and see the miseries of this world at any moment. And it's not negative to think the miseries of this material world. It's actually being very practical and understanding what one should do. Because if one understands the realities of this world, one can look at them and know what to do and what not to do. One can't live one's life in illusion, thinking what they want it to be. Sometimes that may be a problem with our minds, is the mind is always thinking of how we want certain circumstances to turn out. Oh, I want to make this much money, or I want to have these many kids, or I want to have this, ideal looking type of family, or I want this kind of great job. And as they say, that man plans, what's it?
Man proposes, God
Yeah,
disposes.
man proposes, God disposes. What did you say?
Man plans and God laughs.
Yeah, exactly. So we see, if any of us, even in Krishna consciousness, we made certain plans that we thought they were going to happen, and they didn't happen. And for the devotee, he understands Krishna has other plans for me to do other great things. So I should take this as Krishna's mercy. And so even seemingly horrible things that may be happening, if we look with introspection and detachment, we can see that Krishna has another arrangement. Similarly, there's this the story of a man that lived in a village, and one of his horses left the village, and everyone in the village was like, "Oh, this is horrible! Your horse left." And he's like, "Good, bad, who's to say? We don't know." And so the horse came back actually with 100 more horses, and he had so many more horses, and everyone in the village was like, "Oh, this is so wonderful! You have so many horses now." And he was just like totally ego posed. He's like, "Good, bad, who's to say?" And then one day his son broke his leg trying to train some of the horses or break some of the horses. And it was like, "Oh, it's so horrible. This is your only helper. What are you going to do? You have all these horses." He's like, "Good, bad, who's to say?" And so the military actually comes through and takes all the young men for war. But they couldn't take his son because he had a broken leg. And so similarly, sometimes we think situations that are very bad or difficult or hopeless are actually, if we look at it in the right way, can actually be great benefits to advancing Krishna consciousness. And therefore, we're not influenced by the difficulties of happiness and stress, of gain and loss. We just see these things as Krishna's arrangement, and that let me just do my duty to the best to please Krishna. Because it's not really about our results and pleasing Krishna. It's really the ability to wanting to please Krishna, the desire to please Krishna. We'll leave those results up to Krishna, and sometimes that can be difficult. It can be difficult to not be attached to our activities. But that's the training in Krishna consciousness. That we must be detached with the weapon of knowledge by reading Srimad books on a daily basis. And so when we put in difficult situations, we'll know what to do and what not to do. And so, therefore, this Krishna consciousness has the solution to all problems in life. And that is ultimately to engage in service to Krishna in a favorable way, and to try to give Krishna to as many people as possible. And that we understand that, as it said in Bhagavad Gita, Matra Sparsha Stakunteya Shtoshna Dukadukta Agamipyo Nitastam Dikstasya Bharata. And Krishna says that to Arjuna, "O son of Kunti, the non-appearances of happiness and distress are just like the disappearance and appearance of the winter and summer seasons. They rise out of sense perception, the sign of Bharata. One must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed." So the key is that we have to learn to deal with happiness and distress. And one may say, "Well, happiness? Like, that's kind of an easy thing, right? Everyone likes being happy." But the problem with happiness, or when things are going great, or when people are praising you, or things of this nature, is that the false ego sometimes starts to kick in and starts thinking, "Oh yeah, I am pretty great, and everyone is pretty right, and wow, like, look at me, look what I'm doing. I want some praise and recognition, please praise me." We get this kind of weird mood coming on. And naturally, we're all conditioned souls, so we have these things going on. It's not necessarily wrong to think like that, but it's a difference between thinking and acting on that. That if we see that someone's trying to praise us in so many particular ways, we should be that this is just Krishna is giving me mercy, and that he's reciprocating with my activities. But ultimately, it's all Krishna's doing. And so we should see ourselves as the servant of the servant of the servant, and enabled in our process of trying to control the mind and senses, we can actually become successful in Krishna consciousness and understand what we're really doing. Sometimes we may, at least I know for myself, so we may get into a particular mode of just kind of doing things out of habits, and whether it may be coming to Mogalartik, or whether it may be reading the books, or just kind of doing things on an artificial level, that we should constantly be pushing ourselves in Krishna consciousness to understand things from the proper point of view, and actually to understand, well, why am I not showing up for Mogalartik? Why don't I have a taste for this? Why don't I have a taste for Holinian? What is it that in what I'm doing that's not bringing me inspiration in Krishna consciousness? And so we have to constantly see where we're at and act accordingly. So are there any questions or comments? Yes?
Thanks for class.
Thank you.
Do the demons know, or actually, I mean, they're fighting Krishna, right? They're angry, they're full of emotion,
Mm.
they're thinking about Krishna a lot, but do they know deep down that they're going to get liberation after he kills them? Do they even know that?
Well, according to Srimad Bhagawatam, some of, I don't, maybe, can you answer that, Marsh? I'm not sure, in technically speaking, according to Srimad Bhagawatam, whether they know they're attaining liberation, but I would say that I don't think they do know, because they're under a particular Mahamaya. They're not really in Yoga Maya. I mean, I guess it could be dependent according to the circumstance, because a lot of these pastimes are meant to kind of teach us something. But they could be in Mahamaya or Yoga Maya. But
Could I say something?
please.
Prabhupada said, I know only what Krishna wants me to know. So
Okay.
they know exactly what Krishna wants them to know.
Yeah, they may know or they may not know. So I guess it depends on what, according to what she was saying, to what Krishna wants them to know, and then they may not know, because oftentimes we may even find ourselves, like a lot of us have read the philosophy, like we've read a lot of the books and we've practiced a certain degree, but there are particular times in our lives where the material energy kind of comes in and gives us a choice. And sometimes we don't choose Krishna, we choose the material energy, so we become kind of covered over, in a sense. It was kind of like, I always thought it was interesting that they were, and I use this example sometimes, is they were talking about Siddhartha Gautama, or they use the term, the title of Buddha. And then a lot of scholars, they'll say things like, he was 29 when he came to the realization that they're suffering, and that he didn't really understand that beforehand. And then you kind of question it, and you would think, well, hold on a second, this guy came from a royal household. He had the best of education. He was trained like a Kshatriya, as a ruler. He was highly intelligent and aware before he became the Buddha. I mean, just in a material sense. He was actually trained as a warrior in different ways. And so the question may arise, well, how is it that someone like that didn't know about suffering? I mean, everybody knows about suffering, right? Like, anybody knows, like you can go on the street and see anybody suffering. The idea is that it's not that he didn't know, he said he didn't have to really realize it in a sense because even ourselves, we're seeing on a day-to-day basis that people die every day, right? And we read it in the newspaper, we hear it on the internet, we hear all these things, but still in a particular sense, we think it's a little bit removed from us. We don't think it's going to happen to us until it does happen to us. Like we may hear stories of certain devotees that pass away and you're like, oh my God, I would never believe they would pass away, because it kind of touches us to a certain degree. And so a lot of times we need to be shocked with certain circumstances we come under. But if we actually really understand the nature of suffering, and that if we really realize it, understand that, probably it's described that one will act as if each day was their last, right? Like we really thought, I'm going to die tomorrow. If I really thought that I was going to die tomorrow, I would be a lot more serious about my Krishna consciousness. But because of my mind and senses, I'm thinking, oh yeah, plenty of time, right? I think that when I first joined the ashram, I was thinking, oh yeah, I have plenty of time. I can read these books later, And then, 20 years later, it's like, okay, where I'm at in Krishna consciousness, I'm kind of spaced out and I don't know the philosophy and so many particular things. So we should think in such a way that death can come at any moment, and that we should take these things to heart and not think, well, I'll just do it later, or I'll chant later, or I've often heard the terms of sometimes different Indian people will say things like, they're like, okay, when I get older, when I get into my 50s and 60s or 70s, then I'll get more serious about Krishna consciousness. I'll become a vegetarian, and I'll get real serious about Krishna. And a lot of them have this misconception that practicing Bhakti Yoga means later on in life, as you get older. Well, you don't know when death can come. And no one knows. I mean, everyone's shocked even when 9/11, who would have thought something as crazy as that would have happened. But even I remember when I heard it, and it was hard for me to believe, and I was telling other people that, and they're like, what? What are you talking about? I said, yeah, watch it on TV. I mean, a lot of people had a hard time accepting it. So the point is that Krishna, as Krishna was saying, is that Krishna lets people know what he wants them to know, but a lot of times Krishna gives what people desire, right? Krishna is so merciful that if you don't want to be a part of Krishna, he gives you that. He gives you exactly what you want. And so that relates to our sincerity and our devotional service. Krishna is giving us everything we want. And if we're just really sincere and just trying to please Krishna, Krishna will actually give us the world. But it's just like within our own hearts that Krishna is just revealing to us and giving to us exactly what we want and where we're at. And I always thought it's interesting within Bhakti Yoga is that Bhakti Yoga is so unlimited and wonderful. I mean, Krishna is so amazing that even in the modes of material energy, even if you're like, say, an atheist, right? You deny the existence of God. Krishna will give you that opportunity where you can't understand him. It's just too unfathomable. You can't understand him. But even if you're an atheist, you deny the existence of God, but you engage in pious activity, you get karma for that. You know, because we've met it, right? We've met certain people that are atheists. They could be serious vegetarians or very thoughtful. It's very known that a lot of humanitarian efforts are people going out there trying to feed the hungry, the poor, all these different things. But at the same time, they could have a very atheistic type of philosophy. Like they think, if God existed, why would he let all this suffering happen type of thing? But let me just go help those people. So we understand that even people that are out there trying to help the world in different ways are very secular and sometimes very atheistic. But because they've engaged in very pious activities, they can get karma in their next life. So that's pretty wonderful. We know different types of other paths of religions, and they say basically, if you hadn't got it quite right, if you haven't accepted everything within this, you can either burn in hell eternally, and that's it. Like even if you were like in Asia and you never got to hear the word of God, and that just because of that, you can burn eternally, forever. Now if you think about it, that's a very heavy concept. It's kind of like if you think about the father that has a child, right? The child is in general a pretty good kid, but he's kind of sometimes naughty sometimes. So the father says, okay, I'm done with this. He takes kerosene, pours it on the child, lights a match, and tosses it, and watches the kid burn eternally. Just that act alone would throw anyone like, oh my God, how could you do such a horrible thing? Right? It's so unthinkable, right? But not only that, but he watches it eternally. That's like a nonstop, that's just like a horrible way to think, right? So, but this is the philosophy that's been given, right? And other particular types of faiths. But we understand, even if you're an atheist, you deny the existence of God, but you engage in some pious activity, you can still make some advancement. And so, to me, that seems a little more fair and reasonable, right? Even philosophically, if you haven't accepted that you can even burn forever, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So certainly that's what's so wonderful about the yoga, that's why we always encourage, even if someone doesn't accept Krishna consciousness, what do we say the secret weapon is? Prasadam, right? Even if someone just eats a little bit of prasadam, they can make spiritual advancement. And that's what I'm banking on, right? I'm banking on eating my way back to Godhead. I don't think I can do it any other way. But Krishna is so merciful that he gives everybody opportunity in Krishna consciousness. And once you've started, you're pretty much on the path. So, yeah. Any thoughts, questions?
Well, I'm wary of prolonging this
Okay.
and testing people's patience, but because you asked,
Yes.
only because you asked,
Yes.
and then you didn't need it.
I'm sorry. I got lost there.
Whether they knew or not that they were going to attain liberation, we have to think about the Leela in its context. And this is a Leela. This isn't just something that happened because of somebody's karma.
Yeah.
This is a Leela, and this was all created to satisfy the Lord. So the Lord arranged for this encounter because he had a desire to engage in what Srila Prabhupada calls some chivalrous activity, some sporting activity. He had a desire to fight with someone, but because he can't fight with just anybody, he needed to arrange for devotees to fight with him. So So when they come as demons to fight with him, they're in their role.
Mm.
And if they're thinking, oh, I'm really devoting, I'm really going to get liberation, what are they going to do? Hold back or something like that?
Mm.
What fun is that?
Yeah.
You know, you get into, if you want to, you know, if a boxer wants to spar, or an MMA guy wants to spar with somebody, they want to spar with somebody that, you know, who actually is going to give them a run for their money. It's going to actually help hone their skills. So this was a lila, and in order to satisfy the Lord, these devotees are in their roles as demons.
Mm.
So I doubt that they're thinking, oh, I'm going to get liberation. Oh, only two and a half more leelas, you know, 2.5 more leelas, I'm going to get liberation. But the whole thing was arranged by the Lord to satisfy his desire. So that also comes back, and this is a comment I was going to make, but I'm going to make it anyway, and you all will have to live through that.
Thank you.
They, as far as their choice is concerned, you brought this up in your discussion, that choice was based on the Lord's desire. The Lord gave them the choice, but they knew which choice to make
Yeah.
because they're close to the Lord. So they chose they made the choice that would give the Lord his satisfaction. That's the definition of devotional service. It's activity intended to give pleasure to the Lord.
Mm.
So although Kamsa's dying gave some pleasure to the Lord, his activities aren't counted as bhakti, because his intention was not to give pleasure to the Lord. His intention was to harm the Lord.
Mm.
And Mother Yashoda's, some of her activities didn't make the Lord so happy, as we see in the Damodar Lila.
Mm.
But that's pure devotional service, because her intention in putting him down to go attend to the milk boiling over on the stove was to serve, was to give pleasure to Krishna, give the greatest pleasure to Krishna, keep him from raiding the native ladies' pantries.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So this is all it's all a play. Srila Prabhupada makes it really clear when you discuss it. The one place where this idea of whether you can fall from Goloka comes up in the Bhagavatam, only one place it comes up, very beginning of the 7th canto, when we're again being set here. We've been set up for the Lord's dealing with Hiranyaksha. Beginning of the 7th canto, we're going to see the setup for the Lord's dealing with Hiranyakashipu in order to give pleasure to his devotee Prahlada. It's a name for Krishna, Prahlada Halada. He gives pleasure to Prahlada. We see that where Narada Muni is talking to Yudhishthira, and he tells him, by the way, there's 2 cousins of yours, Shishupal, Dantavakra, those guys, they used to be residents of Vaikuntha. They used to be personal associates of the Lord in Vaikuntha. And Yudhishthira is like, the word he uses is impossible. That's impossible, because their bodies are made of pure spiritual substance. How's that possible? So Srila Prabhupada explains in the purport to the 35th verse of that first chapter of the 7th canto that this is a lila. This is an arrangement that the Lord made to satisfy a particular desire of his. This is otherwise. It's the fact that no one falls from the spiritual sky. So this is all a lila. So they're in their roles, and they've made the choice they made because that's what's going to please the Lord, and they know that. How do they know that? Because they're close to the Lord.
Thank you. I'm glad
For indulging me.
I'm glad I'm sorry if I
No.
didn't acknowledge you properly. All right, Srimad Bhagawatam class, keep Jai. Welcome.